The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spin-off with help from Callaghan Innovation. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
Today's guest is a serial entrepreneur, and if you haven't heard of his latest company, you've very likely seen their work on awarded and effective websites for clients like Marketo, Visa, Air New Zealand, Spark, and Les Mills. Having started just 6 years ago with a perfectly timed mix of design, brand, marketing, and build for the market, his agency Little Giant came and got big fast. Little Giant was one of New Zealand's fastest growing companies in 2015 on the Deloitte Fast 50, one of Asia Pacific's fastest growing tech companies in 2015 and 16, and Mark was named an EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist in 2017. They grew big and they got bought by one of the leading players in global advertising, the $11 billion annual revenue behemoth, Dentsu Aegis. It's a huge achievement in a short time, but it wasn't Mark's first rodeo. He's been starting companies since he was 17 and learnt some hard lessons along the way that he's turned into his exit and next launching pad. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so tell me about your start in entrepreneurship. You started out with companies at 17, which is a bit unusual.
Yeah, well, I guess I came from a family of entrepreneurs. So my mum and dad, if I think about it across the years, they owned an earth-moving company in Papua New Guinea, a beef farm in Kirikiri, a pallet factory in Hikurangi, an AA licensing centre, a clothing store, photocopy shop, and so I grew up around two entrepreneurs that were constantly following their own kind of dreams and passions. And so for me, it never seemed like any other option. I always kind of wanted to create my own thing and make my own way in the world.
That's so cool. And what does having that kind of opening up to all those different perspectives of places like Papua New Guinea and across New Zealand, what does that do to a young mind?
Yeah, well, I guess Papua New Guinea was probably a little bit too early for me to remember. I think we came back when I was 3 or 4. So, I don't have many memories from that time. But we spent some time down in Tauranga, Mount Maunganui, and then Kirikiri is where I grew up. I guess what I got out of the most is watching my parents sacrifice, watching them work extremely hard for their dreams. Seeing the kind of reward in terms of them being able to choose their own way in the world, being able to decide where they spent their time. I think that's what kind of excited me about it. You weren't defined to that 9 to 5. You were building something, creating something, and you had your kind of own freedom around where you spent your time and effort.
And so when you decided to get going in business for yourself at that young age, what did they say to you?
They were always super supportive, honestly. They never, ever put up a single roadblock. They perhaps questioned some of my initial thinking, which looking back now, I wish I'd probably done a little bit more. They were extremely supportive, and I can't thank them enough for that.
Tell me about your first go through the entrepreneurial cycle.
Yeah, well, it actually came about, so it was the summer between high school and university, and I was working up in a northern orchard, which was one of my first jobs, picking mandarins in northern summer. That's not an incredibly fun job. I did that for about 3 weeks and realised that kind of wasn't for me. And suddenly thought, I've got to figure out another way to essentially make money for beer on the weekends. That's kind of was my only goal at the time. I was 17 years old. So my mum at the time had a photocopy store with a T-shirt press in it. I decided that I was going to design up some T-shirts and sell them to the local surf store. And that's what I did. And then it kind of just snowballed from there over the next kind of 3 to 4 years to a point where when I left university, we kind of had a company to jump into. And
That's so cool. And so building a surf kind of apparel brand from the ground up, or what kind of thing was it?
Well, essentially what we were is we were a graphic design company. When I look back at it now, our output just happened to be kind of men's apparel. So we created brands for, so we did Farmers, Saint Modern we did for Farmers, Illuminati we did for the Warehouse Group and Torpedo 7. We had a men's underwear brand. So really it was kind of fast fashion focused on men's t-shirts. We had a variety of different brands in the market, and we had that business for about 8 to 10 years.
That's a really big move from selling a few shirts to a surf store up north to then supplying the biggest listed companies in New Zealand with fast fashion. How did you go from doing it yourself on a copying machine to international supply?
Well, really, I guess through my parents' support, it was like, here's an opportunity here, here's a business, let's go to the bank, let's get a little bit of money, and then let's start scaling up production and scaling up our kind of sales workforce. And so that's what we did. At the time when we launched, it was kind of pre-GFC. You could kind of roll up to a surf store in New Zealand and they would probably buy a decent amount of clothing from you. I think the market's changed. I'm not in it anymore, but I gather the market's changed pretty dramatically in retail now. It's definitely not that easy. So I think at the time we were in a unique kind of space and time, and it made that possible.
And you also would have been there for the massive waves of disruption of international supply and fast fashion. And what kind of things did you learn from being in that landscape where perhaps you were doing big volume, but it wasn't, bringing big money or that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I guess apparel was my first business, right? So I had no other context. I didn't really, and I wish I had researched that particular industry, because what I learned probably the most was that not every industry is the same. Some are just straight up harder than others, and apparel is incredibly hard. I take my hat off to anyone. I think about like Steve from Huffer, guys that have had businesses for, like 15, 16, I'm not sure how long ago now, but really long-term successful businesses. It's incredibly hard in that market.
And then you also look at it, and some of the world's richest people are out of apparel. So if you get it right, you can do very well. But as far as I can see from that mix, getting it right means squeezing every person in the chain.
Yeah, perhaps. I always say to people that the failure, I call it a failure, but I think like when I look at apparel business, we were profitable for, 8 years, and we ended up selling the business at the end. So you could say it wasn't a failure, but I personally kind of look at it as a failure because it was a constant grind. It never quite hit the success that I hoped for with a company. But I look at all the lessons that we took out of that, and I think that's a big part of why Little Giant was so successful, is everything we took from our apparel company.
So what kind of things did you take? What led you to go from the world of apparel and supply chains and warehouse management and inventory and all of that kind of difficult grinding stuff into the ideas business, which is what an agency is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I guess personally I was always creatively driven, and then the idea behind Little Giant is really the marrying of art and science, or the creativity and technology. And I got exposed to technology when we actually first built our first kind of fashion e-commerce store. So we launched that into the market. I think it would have been about 2005 probably, so pretty early on, probably too early. People really didn't probably trust putting their credit card in a browser back then, but that kind of exposure to e-commerce technology for me really got me interested in technology, and I guess that's kind of the basis from which Little Giant was born. And so how it came about was the clothing store, the clothing company at the time, we rented out desk space to Mike Little. He was my business partner that I started Little Giant with. He was a developer. I kind of brought, I guess, the creative aspect of the business. We saw an opportunity in the market, and so we sat down and decided to kind of launch our own agency, and that was how Little Giant was born.
And what was your proposition that made you guys different than other agencies out there, or other web designers, or other website builders, or other e-commerce helpers? What was your mix that made it special?
I guess we looked at the market we were going into and we saw massive changes. I think above the line advertising spend is obviously declining rapidly. I think that there's a large change in the marketing mix. Advertising is becoming less and less important in the marketing mix. We saw an opportunity for an agency to be built from the ground up for what we believe brands needed in the connected age. And so what we saw missing is we saw legacy agencies who had strong strategic and creative capability. And then we saw digital agencies who really were just production houses. They didn't have that strategic or creative capability. And so we thought there was a big opportunity in the market to build an agency that married that art and science or that creativity and technology.
Because it's only 6 years ago, but still, we bank gains so fast these days. I was working in networked ad agencies 7 years ago, and people would, for a big brand, they'd say, let's do a microsite in Flash. And you'd make like this $150,000 thing that lived on the internet by itself that no one could find, no one could do anything with. There was no way to make $1 out of it. You had to put TV ads on to send people to use it. And that was considered a good project.
Yeah, it was a strange time, that Flash period, actually. And you still actually see some companies with Flash websites. But yeah, you're exactly right. I think when websites first came around, they were treated as silo project without any understanding of how they fit within a kind of wider marketing and brand strategy. I think brands have advanced from there now. They understand that, it isn't just a silo digital asset. It actually needs to play an important role in your overall business strategy.
And it was kind of for the big players that things were the most siloed, while the little players, people who had to sell shirts through their website, they were doing it. And so I guess that's an interesting thing to have brought to the mix, but also design. And so something that, as an outside observer looking at the growth of Little Giant over the years, you've entered design awards, design's been a big feature of it, but also going for that marketing mix, like how you make $1 out of it. And is that fusing of design and marketing, was that something that helped you grow?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that really falls under that kind of creativity and technology. So, it's about owning all of those brand touch points for our clients along the way. So whether that is the initial kind of brand identity or brand communication strategy, creative concepting, campaign creative, actual digital asset build, infrastructure build, etc. I really think brands need an agency to manage all of those different brand touch points along the way.
Tell me about the growth. Like when did you know it was working, and how quickly did you find that you had yourself like the tail of the tiger?
I think when it probably dawned on me that we had cracked something was when we outgrew our office and we had to knock down a wall. I think that's the first time that I really thought, we're onto something here, like we've got some good traction. We've got clients kind of lining up to work for us. That's when I really felt like we had kind of made something of ourselves.
How long did that take you?
Well, it was actually a bit of a slow burn for us because we didn't take on any debt. I learned from my previous company that I think debt can actually hamper high-quality decision-making. You kind of get a little bit short-term in your thinking, and you're constantly thinking about how to service that debt instead of grow a long-term sustainable business. And so we didn't take on any debt with Little Giant. We wanted to grow something organic and sustainable. So we had a really slow beginning. The first couple of years, we really were just kind of doing work on the side for Ogilvy and Colenso and some of those larger agencies, purely doing digital production work. So it was a really slow burn. I think probably about 3 years in was when we kind of, probably outgrew our first office, and I started to think, we've got a massive opportunity here.
And what was it that went from doing the work on the side to being the place that people were knocking on your door? Did you have a success that meant that other people were like, oh, I need to get some of that? Or was it just that kind of build and build?
Yeah, I think we put our head down and just focused on doing really high quality work and relying on word of mouth. I think too, the market was just changing with us, so we were in the right space. Brands were probably becoming less and less happy with their existing client agency relationships, and they were looking for something new. They were looking for an agency that understood digital channels and how to amplify their brand communication across those digital channels. I really do think it was part and parcel about us delivering great work into market and also us having an offering that kind of resonated with brands' needs.
And having sold a company before, did you already have an exit plan? Did you start this thinking, this is something that I want to spin up and get out of or move on, or was it like a long-term goal?
It was a long-term thing for me. I never planned to sell the company at all. I am a big believer, though, in always having your company ready to sell, even if you have no intention to do so. I think that's just good business practice. But no, I had never any intention to sell Little Giant when we did. it just came down to we got a unique opportunity, and it felt really aligned with what we wanted to do with the company going forward.
What kind of things did you have to learn along the way to become the CEO of an ad agency with a bunch of different elements between the creative and the production and the account service? How did you upskill in those things?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm really inquisitive by nature, and so I love learning. And so as we adopted new technology, I would always try and get very hands-on with that technology and learn about it myself. How did I become a CEO? I guess, yeah, it's just through experience, really. I look back at that first business, the apparel business, and I look back at all the mistakes I made, and it really just came down to maturity and experience, I think. And so I learned a lot. So by the time Little Giant came around and we started, I was 28, and I feel like I was a far better leader than I was with the apparel business.
And tell me about building your team, because something that if people follow your company on the social networks, you do quite a bit to promote new hires, team members, the work of your people. How do you build a team, and how important is that for an ideas agency?
Yeah, people for us are everything. I think if you look at what we do, we literally sell our people's time, so they are our product. We've always wanted the very best people, and we want to retain the very best people, and so we know that we need to put people first. Everything about our culture is around creating the absolute best environment possible for those individuals. But I can't stress enough that the people are really what's made Little Giant successful.
And so how did it come that you were making the sale to such a big player? So having come as a true independent and got some big brands, bitten off bits of work for big brands and taken down big brands, did you start to annoy them? Were you like a mosquito they had to squash, or how does it work?
I'm not sure about that. We'd probably have to ask Rob from Dentsu, but Rob had been chatting to me for a couple of years. They had been interested in moving in the space that we were operating for a couple of years here in New Zealand. Again, I never had any intention to sell, so it was kind of like polite conversations, but no thank you. I guess we got to a point where we spent enough time together that we realised that the vision for Little Giant and the vision for the Dentsu Aegis network here in New Zealand aligned really well. We saw an opportunity to be able to kind of leverage their global capabilities and resource to help us scale quicker. And most importantly, we saw an alignment in culture between them and us. I felt like this move was the best thing for our people.
Yeah, how did the people react? How did that go?
Yeah, well, they've been great. So a large part of the negotiation with Dentsu wasn't as much about kind of the price of the acquisition, but was a lot about kind of control and making sure that we got to maintain our brand and our identity and our culture. And that's what our people really care about. The way that I kind of frame this deal to them is we're staying the same old Little Giant. We're still going to be kind of independently minded. It's just that now we have this kind of global capabilities and resources when and if we need them.
And what does it allow you to do? What do those resources, I imagine the life of an entrepreneur, it's like, if we just had a little bit more resource, we could just do a bit more. What does it mean for you now to look at a situation where there is the resource and there is the backing? Yeah,
well, as you said, for me, being an entrepreneur, it's always been kind of bootstrapped everything. And so now... it's really nice having that kind of global support. The main reason for us that we wanted the additional capabilities that they bring is around technology. So right now in New Zealand, we support, for example, the PHP stack. Very hard for us to build teams across all the available different emerging technologies and then be able to kind of maintain those teams and service the market with the size of New Zealand. And so what it gives us the capability to do today is deliver across a whole bunch of different technology platforms that we simply wouldn't have been able to if we stayed as an independent. And so really the way that we frame that is we feel like our ideas are no longer restricted by our technology. We have the ability to deliver AR and VR solutions. Tomorrow, for example, we have the ability to deliver Sitecore. We have the ability to deliver Adobe Experience Platform. We previously just couldn't do that with our in-house team.
And you're staying as the CEO, and what are your next plans with the company then?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about the next few years. I really am. I feel like I've got some renewed energy for the company and where we're going. We've got the same mission as we had previously. We just kind of have additional support to get there. A really exciting thing about joining Dentsu Aegis is the access to some of their IP. So, for example, they're opening up some of their IP from Isobar Melbourne. That's about a 200-person agency over there. The ability for us to learn from their growth from a 60 to a 200-person agency and be able to download that IP is incredibly valuable to a company like us. So, yeah, we've got some really, really big plans here in New Zealand over the next 3 to 4 years.
And how about having been through the entrepreneur cycle a couple of times and still, very early in your career? What does that set you up to do next? And what kind of things, are you a person who has a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan? What does this open up for you?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm really focused on what we're going to do next with Little Giant, but I've always had other business interests as well. I'm investing in Sharesies at the moment. I know Brooke's actually been on your podcast.
Yeah, they're great.
Really big fan of Sharesies. Personally, I mean, as you've kind of talked about in the podcast previously as well, I think it's a real shame that Kiwis only invest in property. And I think Sharesies is a perfect platform to try and, curb that habit of Kiwis. But yeah, Brooke, they've got a really strong team there at Sharesies. They've got a great product, they've got a great brand. So I'm investing in their latest round and then going to kind of sit as a casual advisor for them when and if need be.
Cool. And in terms of, if people come to you, maybe people you grew up with in Kerikeri, if they come to you and they say, wow, what does it take to be an entrepreneur? And how can I take the leap? What kind of advice do you give people now?
Well, I think it all comes down to that self-motivation. I think there's particular individuals that are more suited to being entrepreneurs than others. I think you need to be able to self-motivate. No one's going to make you get up in the morning. You need to have that kind of unrelenting drive and passion. I think first and foremost, that's really important. I also think I encourage people to research the markets that they're going into. I probably, when I was young, followed my passion a little bit too much. I probably would have been good if I had taken a bit of an objective step back and looked at what we're doing from a commercial sense. Not all good ideas make profitable businesses. That's something else I would encourage. And I just think it comes down to willing to put in the hard yards, willing to sacrifice, and be extremely determined and single-minded, because a lot of people along the way are going to tell you that's a stupid idea, it won't work. I mean, I can think of, just off the top of my head, 5 or 6 conversations I had about Little Giant with people who were a lot more senior and knew a lot more about the industry than me, telling me when we were 8 people, when we were 12 people, when we were 15 people, it's hard to scale further. A lot of agencies like you pop up, et cetera, et cetera. You're always going to have those doubters. So you need to have that determination and self-confidence, I think.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, thank you very much for coming to chat to us today, Mark Hurley, the CEO of Little Giant, and congratulations on the acquisition by Dentsu Aegis, a huge achievement. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers.
Thank you very much to Madeline Chapman for producing, and thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by The Spin-Off and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.